Did the Nazis have killer robots? Yes, they did, but they didn't look like humanoids. And they didn't look like this either. When we hear the word robot, most of us think of this sort of thing. This is the famous Maschinenmensch, or machine human, from the classic 1927 sci-fi film Metropolis. The word robot derives from the Czech word robota, which literally means serf labor, or figuratively drudgery, or hard work or labor. The term was first used in its presently understood sense in the 1920 Czech play RUR, or Rozum's Universal Robots. A robot is a machine capable of carrying out a complex series of actions automatically. A robot can be guided by an external control device, or the control may be embedded within. Most robots don't resemble humans, but rather are task-performing machines, and Nazi Germany used many robots both as ingenious and terrifying weapons, but also as tools for more benign defense work. Before we meet our first Nazi killer robot, a word from our sponsor. Cold turkey may be great on sandwiches, but there's a better way to break your bad habits. We're not talking about some weird mind voodoo from your crazy neighbor. We're talking about our sponsor, Fume, and they look at the problem in a different way. Fume is an award-winning device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all natural, delicious flavors. It's a habit you're free to enjoy and makes replacing your bad habit easy. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing and anxiety while breaking your habit. It feels great. It's well-weighted, perfectly balanced, and extremely fun to fidget with. For a New Year's resolution, give the gift of better habits with Fume. Head to tryfume.com/Mark Felton and use the code Mark Felton to get a free Fume topper when you order a journey pack. Again, tryfume.com/Mark Felton, or just scan the QR code on screen. Grab yours now and make someone's New Year unforgettable. One of Germany's most successful robotic killers was the Goliath demolition tank. Several countries, notably France and the Soviet Union, had worked pre-war on perfecting remote-controlled robotic tanks that could be used for extremely dangerous tasks, saving highly trained human soldiers from danger. The Germans eventually produced a series of 3 demolition tanks for the purpose of remotely destroying fixed fortifications and other targets, produced primarily by the Borgward car company. The Borgward IV was the largest such vehicle, developed in 1942. It was a smallish tractor vehicle weighing 3.45 tons with a crew of 1. It was powered by a Borgward water-cooled 4-cylinder petrol engine and could manage 25 miles per hour or 40 kilometers an hour on a road surface. It was protected from enemy fire by armor up to 20 millimeters thick. Loaded with explosives, the driver would bring the Borgward close to the target before dismounting, handing control over to another armored fighting vehicle, usually a specially converted Panzer III. From then on, the Borgward was controlled by radio. The controller directed the Borgward to the target, where it automatically released its explosive payload before being remotely driven away from danger, the human driver remounting it and taking over and driving it back to safety. So it was a reusable robotic vehicle, but its thin armor did make it vulnerable to light anti-tank guns and enemy artillery fire. 1,181 Borgward IVs were built, but it was not considered a success by the German army, as it was not reusable and it was expensive. Some were modified for use as ammunition delivery vehicles, driving remotely forward to resupply troops in combat. Next, the Germans created a demolition vehicle that could be reused. It was, in effect, a robot bomb. The Goliath, a miniature tank which could carry a 60-kilo or 130-pound explosive charge. The Goliath was very small, making it a difficult target to hit. It was only 1.5 meters long and half a meter tall. It weighed 370 kilograms or 820 pounds. The German Goliath was lightly armoured with 5 mm of protection, good against small arms and shrapnel, though the tracks were fully exposed. It was operated by a single soldier using a handheld remote control device. Signals were sent to the Goliath via a 650-metre or just over 2,000-foot cable that paid out the rear of the little tank. There were 3 strands to the cable, one to move the Goliath, one for steering, and one to detonate the charge, the Goliath being a single-use vehicle to be expended during the attack. The vehicle's 2 electric motors gave the Goliath a maximum speed of 6 km an hour or 3.7 miles per hour, though later versions used a cheaper petrol engine. The change to a 2-cylinder petrol engine manufactured by Zundab improved the weapon's range to 7 miles. In 1944, a bigger version of the Goliath was manufactured with an increased explosive payload. The switching from a battery-powered electric motor to a noisy petrol engine meant that the Allies could also now hear the Goliath as it tried to sneak up on a target, further aiding its destruction. This ingenious little vehicle saw plenty of combat. One of the extensive uses of the Goliath was during the Battle of Anzio in Italy in April 1944, an Allied amphibious operation to outflank very solid German defences on the Italian peninsula with an aim of capturing Rome. The Germans managed initially to contain the Allied beachhead, subjecting it to considerable pressure. During a German counterattack against the Anzio beachhead, 13 Goliaths were sent forward to destroy Allied strongpoints to create a breach in the line. But Allied artillery fire destroyed 3 of the Goliaths before they could get close, and the remaining 10 were withdrawn by their operators as they were too vulnerable to Allied heavy weapons. During the D-Day landings in Normandy in June 1944, some Goliaths were captured by the British and Americans, again after artillery fire had severed their control cables.
Demonstration of the Nazi midget demolition tank captured both in Italy and in France. Loaded with explosives, the tiny tank can be sent against selected targets by radio control. This device appears to be expendable. A larger type can be retrieved by radio after discharging its load of explosives. Troops in this area call it the doodlebug, and here one of the GIs goes for a ride.
Goliaths were used by the SS during the crushing of the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, when the Polish Home Army rose up against the Germans occupying Poland's capital. The Germans ruthlessly crushed all opposition, destroying vast stretches of the city and killing tens of thousands of civilians. The Goliaths were used to destroy Polish bunkers and fortified buildings. But many had their cables cut by brave resistors before reaching their targets, the long, thin cables being very vulnerable to attack. Though Borgward produced 7,564 Goliaths, most failed to successfully attack well-defended enemy strongpoints, the weaknesses in the design being the aforementioned trailing control cable and the Goliath's very thin armour. But the design concept certainly worked and could be improved upon, and the Goliath is generally acknowledged to have helped lay the foundation for modern remote-controlled military vehicles. The third iteration of the German robot demolition vehicle was the Springer, a 2.4-ton track vehicle based on the NSU SDKFZ2 Kettenkrad, a half-track motorcycle. Heavily modified and powered by the original Kettenkrad's Opel Olympia engine, the Springer carried a 730-pound explosive charge, protected by some 10 mm of armour. Similar in operation to the Borgward IV, a driver sitting at the back of the vehicle drove the Springer close to the target before dismounting. The Springer was then controlled wirelessly by a special armoured control vehicle and guided up to 2 kilometers in this manner to the target before detonating. But the Springer suffered the same problems as the Borgward IV, not particularly reliable and expensive to make, and importantly not reusable. So the Goliath was the most successful of these robotic vehicles deployed by the Germans. Accurate weather prediction was vital to the Germans, particularly concerning likely invasion windows for the Allies in Europe and for planning and executing offensives of their own, such as the Ardennes in 1944. The Germans were at a disadvantage throughout World War II, as the weather systems generally moved from west to east in the Northern Hemisphere, and firstly through Allied-controlled territories such as North America, Greenland, Iceland, and so on. The Germans had to employ a variety of methods to plot the weather, and initially relied on weather-reporting aircraft flying long missions into the Atlantic or Arctic regions. U-boats were similarly employed, sending coded weather reports to headquarters from the wastes of the Atlantic and elsewhere, but such reporting was not regular, and sending reports could endanger a submarine or aircraft. A series of converted fishing boats, packed with meteorological instruments and radios, were also deployed, often falsely flying Allied or neutral flags. But they were hunted down using radio direction finding and seized or sunk. German scientists partially solved the problem by using robots. In this case, ingenious robotic weather stations hidden beneath the waves and automatically appearing to send weather reports up to 4 times a day. The WFS, or the Wetterfunkgeräte, or Marine Weather Station, was a type of buoy, or buoy as the Americans call them, developed by Siemens in association with the Kriegsmarine. It was long and thin, designed to be deployed from a U-boat torpedo tube. The robotic weather station consisted of 2 cylinders that telescopically slid into one another. Once released from the U-boat, the station would bob to the surface upright, and the bottom cylinder would slide down under its own gravity, stretching the whole assembly to 10 meters in length underwater, with a weighted section with a long length of chain that floated down to the seabed, holding the buoy in place like a magnetic mine. In the long, heavy part of the assembly were batteries for heating lamps and to power the transmitter. In the top part of the buoy were the instruments and sensors, an encoding machine, and a shortwave Lorentz transmitter with a 150-watt amplifier. Finally, on the top of the buoy was a 9-meter-long whip antenna that could be raised or lowered automatically. The weather station would automatically measure the parameters of the atmosphere, wind speed, air pressure, and so on, all vital data for meteorologists. 4 times daily, the buoy would automatically raise its long antenna above the waves, take the measurements, and then transmit its data in a burst of code to headquarters in Germany. Each communication session lasting between 60 and 120 seconds, far too short for Allied air or naval forces to pinpoint where the signal was coming from. The Kriegsmarine deployed a series of these robotic weather buoys into the Atlantic off the west coast of neutral Ireland. So successful were they that the British Admiralty promised any fisherman £1,000 sterling, which was a huge sum at the time, if he successfully retrieved one and handed it over to the British authorities. In all, some 15 of these robot weather stations were deployed at sea. The batteries would last for 8 weeks, and the station would then automatically self-destruct once its batteries were exhausted, or if it was tipped over more than 45 degrees, to prevent its being hooked by a cable and captured. The Germans later expanded the use of robotic weather stations to land, using U-boats to set up a series of static weather stations that each had sufficient battery power for about 9 months of life. These stations had to be set up by U-boat crews coming ashore in rubber boats, a time-consuming and cumbersome process. 14 such stations were established in the North Atlantic Arctic region, including in Greenland, Svalbard off Norway, and Franz Josef Land, and one was even landed and operational from Labrador in Canada in 1943. Weather station Kurt wasn't discovered by Canadian authorities until 1981. However, by far the most terrifying use of robots by Nazi Germany was the V1 flying bomb, even dubbed the robot bomb by the British press. The V1 was an early cruise missile powered by a single pulse-jet engine. It was launched off a ramp using a steam generator, guided by a simple autopilot that regulated altitude and airspeed. The V1 carried a 1-ton explosive warhead. An odometer driven by a small propeller in the nose determined when the missile had reached the target area, and when the preset counter reached 0, the V1 automatically placed itself into a steep dive to impact the target. Primarily used to bombard London, these cheap weapons landed accurately within a circle initially 20 miles in diameter, which corresponded to the entirety of London, later improved to 7 miles. 9,521 V1s were launched against England, with about 25% getting through to hit targets, the remainder falling to flak guns, barrage balloon cables, fighter interception or mechanical failure. They killed 6,184 people and injured 3 times that number, as well as destroying or damaging 1 million buildings. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.